It's the Happy Families podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
We're using our masculinity in ways that make others feel weak and unsafe when not being healthy in our expression of our masculinity.
And now here's the stars of our show, my mum and dad.
Every Tuesday on the Happy Families podcast, well, most Tuesdays, we do our very best to answer your questions. Listener questions can be sent through to podcasts at happyfamilies.com.au. That's podcasts with an S at happyfamilies.com.au. Kylie, we've got a really important and real life gritty question that's come through. In fact, we have two questions that are both pretty much saying the same thing. I'm going to get you to read them.
So the first one says, where can I get advice and help for a female parent to best manage a teenage son, male, with anger when he is 6 feet tall and the anger is frightening? And then the second one is, my son is going to be 17 soon, and we've recently, in the last 3 or 4 months, noticed some big changes in him. He's actually doing really well personally. He's happier, more confident, doing better socially, is really open to anything related to church, grades are up, etc. But his mood can change at the flip of a switch. He'll be perfectly normal, having a regular conversation, and then something triggers him, and within 1 second, his entire demeanour changes. I see it in his face. He just goes from 0 to 100. I fully believe that it's not him. It's got to be hormonal. Otherwise, it just doesn't make any sense. He has always been an angry rather than an emotional kid, but not like this. Is there any research to support what I'm saying? I feel like I've heard you talk about this for teenage boys. Would love a podcast episode on it.
Okay, so some really big challenges, and any parent of a teenage boy knows this feeling. Every now and again, teenage boys, well, they start to flex a little bit, don't they? We say no. We start to try to constrain what's going on, and they don't feel so good about it. And because they're, I guess, still learning about their strength, their newfound strength, sometimes they use it in ways that are, quite frankly, terrifying for parents, but are not in everybody's best interests at all.
Well, I'm not going to have much of an opinion about this today, being a mum to lots of girls and an amazing big burly son-in-law who towers over me. But I am really interested on what the research says about this.
Well, the research says, sorry, I couldn't help it. The research says that when there are a handful of things that are worth touching on. First off, I want to talk about self-regulation, and then I want to talk about empathy. But we've also got to have a conversation about power and how we are in our relationship with our kids. And I'm interested because I'm a dad, but I've been a teenage boy. You're a mum who hasn't had a teenage boy, but as I share what I'm sharing, I would be interested in your take on how that feels to be a mum and hear the advice that I'm giving. Okay, and putting yourself in that situation. So the first thing that I want to emphasize is just about self-regulation. So self-regulation is the ability to either express our emotions or contain our emotions in healthy ways. Sometimes they need to be expressed, but other times regulation means that we hold them in. Not that we're going to be bottling them up forever, but we've got to be able to deal with them in appropriate and functional ways. Teenage boys specifically are on a developmental curve, I think we might say politely. They're just learning about self-regulation in all new ways. So self-regulation begins, the ability to either contain or express emotions begins at around about 2 or 3, and it develops slowly over time. We all know plenty of adults who are lousy when it comes to either expression or containing of their emotions. Some people express too much. Some people contain too much. And getting the balance right is a maturation process, and it demands thinking and inner work. When we get into the adolescent years with all the hormones buzzing around and with the newfound strength and the newfound power that comes with being a teenage boy as they grow into their bigger bodies, the idea that I can express my emotions and just get it out is something that a lot of parents will grapple with. Their teenagers may slam doors, may shout and scream, may even become physical. So this is a really big challenge. It develops on a continuum. They get better at it as they get older. But if we look at research by the world's leading adolescent psychological researcher, Lawrence Steinberg. He's shown that this continuum, this trajectory, it's not linear. It's not like they just get a bit better every day and every month and every year with their self-regulation. There are peaks and troughs. And it also relates to how much sleep they're getting, what their diet's like, the quality of their friendships, how things are going at school. So
does this have anything to do with the way they process emotions? Like, obviously, we're dealing with some significant physiological changes that are taking place through this period of time. But then stereotypically, boys don't talk about their emotions. Is this a byproduct of that?
So the first thing I want to say about this stereotypical situation is boys and girls do differ on average. Now, there's a lot of overlap of distributions. That is, there are a lot of boys who act a little bit more like girls and a lot of girls who act a little bit more like boys. But on average, we see a pretty clear differentiation between the way natal boys and natal girls are going to respond to big emotions, the way they're going to process them. And boys often will be quite contained until they're too tired or until that thing happens. And as that second mum said in her email, my son then goes from being really happy to 0 to 100 on anger in the blink of an eye.
This reminds me of my dad when I was growing up. He was like this gentle person all the time until he wasn't. And it was the way he described it to me. He said it was like a balloon. He could take so much, and it was like the air going into the balloon, blowing. And then all of a sudden, pop, it just explodes. And it would come out of nowhere seemingly, but it was because he held everything in. He dealt with all of it and then until he couldn't. There was no reserves.
I love the balloon metaphor. I would change it just a little bit. Rather than blowing more air into it until it pops, I think that it's a little more like you've got that balloon full of air and you're holding it under the water in the pool. And eventually you just can't hold it under the water anymore. Eventually it forces itself to the surface and poof, it explodes out. Either one works, but for me, the pressure is there a lot and for a long time, and all of a sudden, bang, out it comes. So this first issue of self-regulation, we've got to acknowledge that our kids, especially our teenage boys, they're learning about their emotions. Well, hopefully they are. Hopefully we're giving them an emotional vocabulary, and hopefully we're making it safe for them to express their emotions, but doing it in ways that are socially responsible and that are not intimidating and frightening. I think we need to have an important conversation with our kids about what masculinity is, letting our boys know that a real man is strong. There's no doubt about that. But a real man, and we've got plenty of research that shows that the average boy is stronger than 99% of girls, right? I mean, this is just, again, the reality of biology. Boys are stronger than girls. And as they move into adolescence, they discover that. But a real man, somebody who is masculine, a healthy form of masculinity, is that when you're strong, you help the people around you to feel both strong and safe. And when we're using our masculinity in ways that make others feel weak and unsafe, we're not being healthy in our expression of our masculinity. Now, that's a hard conversation to have, and you're not going to have it while your son is blowing up. You're not going to say, I'm feeling weak and unsafe, stop this. Like that doesn't work. But all this comes back to self-regulation. The second thing that I want to talk about is empathy. And we've got data from decades of research now that shows that empathy in boys relative to girls declines as adolescence hits. So there are two kinds of empathy, Kylie. There's cognitive empathy. That's I can think about how you're feeling and I can label it, I can see it. And then there's the affective kind of empathy. That's I'm feeling in my heart what you're feeling in yours.
So just to clarify, when you say empathy declines, are you saying empathy in the boys declines or empathy expressed towards boys declines?
You know what? It could actually be both. I don't know of any data that looks at how empathy is expressed to boys and girls, but when you say that, that really resonates for me. We become impatient and intolerant of boys and their boisterous behavior. They're knocking into things. They're using their bodies, their outbursts, their testosterone-fueled expressions of emotions. And so we will often respond to that kind of behavior with a lot less empathy. I think that's a really important insight. The data that I'm talking about, though, shows that for girls, as they move into and through adolescence, both cognitive and affective empathy both go upwards on a fairly steady trajectory. This is part of the maturation process for them. They just become more empathic. They're more relational. For boys, though, we see that their cognitive empathy It sort of stabilizes at about 13 and does not go up for a couple of years. And their affective empathy, the feeling, I get how you're feeling and I'm feeling it too, that actually drops off from about the age of 12 or 13 and doesn't start to go again until about 17. Like it stays down really, really low. And so we're having this thing where we're saying, I want you to understand how another person's feeling. And they say, I don't care how they feel. Not interested. And I'm not perceiving it even if you ask me to. So those are two really big issues that explain why teenage boys relative to teenage girls are reactive the way they are. There's the hormones, there's the self-regulation, there's the empathy.
So the big question is, what do we do about it?
This is a tough one because our boys don't usually like sitting down and hearing about their development from us as parents as we say, I've noticed that you're having some really big emotions right now. Let's talk about how you're expressing or containing those emotions, and let's talk about your empathy decline. Like, let's get hormonal about this. That's not going to work with them.
If we start these kinds of conversations with our children from a young age, then are we not more likely to be able to continue those conversations?
Yeah, so this is called pre-arming. And by letting them know that the changes are coming, that can be helpful, but the changes still arrive. And when they do, sometimes the kids will still feel completely helpless and out of control anyway.
But you've built a relationship.
Right.
You've built a relationship with them where you can sit down and you can have hard conversations.
So the point here is not necessarily that you've taught them all about development, because not everybody knows that. The point is you've developed a relationship of trust around emotions.
Yeah.
And so what I really would emphasize is a couple of things. First off, teach them that it's normal that they will want to resist you as they move into their teen years. Let them know that and that you're okay with that. That's called differentiation or individuation. And that's what teenagers are designed to do. That's important for healthy development so that they can go and be adults without us being over their shoulder all the time. That's the first thing I'd say. The second thing is I would really emphasize the principle that I talk about all the time, that is that high emotions equals low intelligence. The kids have got to know and understand that when their emotions are peaking, they are going to do and say things that are not wise or safe or healthy. Their intelligence is going to be low. And as they develop that awareness and they hear that mantra again and again, when our emotions are high, our intelligence is low, our IQ drops. Like if you were to do an IQ test when you're feeling normal and then do one when you're feeling angry, you are going to score low the second time around. Your IQ literally drops when you're angry. So explain.
Well, your focus narrows, right?
Exactly, yeah.
You focus on the thing that you're angry about. You can't see anything else, blinders.
Perfect. And so using that metaphor and talking about these things with your kids when they're not in the moment can be really helpful so that when they are in the moment, they can remember. Ultimately, though, we need to deal with what to do in the moment as well.
Well, you've got a mum who's obviously acknowledged she's actually scared.
Yeah, this kid's 6 foot and intimidating. So let me run a line by you. I'm not big on giving people scripts, but sometimes you just need something. And I think that it could be useful if your child lashes out, says something in an angry outburst, male or female, frankly. What does this feel like for you if you would look at your child and say, I'm going to give you another chance to answer that? Or I'm going to assume that you didn't quite mean that. Why don't you try that again? Does that sound like something that you could do? What does that sentence carry with it?
I think it's empathy, because it acknowledges that you recognize that in this moment, they're not acting like they normally would. They're not the person that you know and love right now. And it's not because they want to be that person. They've got some big stuff going on inside. They just don't know how to express it in a positive way. And so by saying that, you're acknowledging that it's probably not what you want to say right now. Can we try that again?
I like your take on that.
I think the hard thing is when you're feeling threatened to express that in such a way.
Great. And this is the point that I really wanted to emphasize. I wasn't thinking so much about the empathy side, but I'm really glad that you picked up on it. The point that I want to emphasize is, as much as you might feel intimidated, you're the mum. Be the adult. Hold your own space. Like there's something that's really profoundly powerful when you can look at somebody who is bigger than you and who is a little bit scary and you can say, I'm going to give you another chance. What you're saying there is I'm confident enough in my power, even though I'm not bigger than you and even though physically you can dominate me, I have the psychological space to deal with this. And by being able to say, you just said something, but I think you probably meant to say it a different way. Why don't you try again? It causes that 14 or 16 or 18-year-old boy to go, I've just been challenged. And because it's my mum, I'm actually not going to lash out. Like, there's something powerful about being able to do that. For me, that would be my ideal response. Now, there are a couple of others that I think are also going to be really useful. The first is giving them in fantasy what they can't have in reality, which is how we draw a line, but with lots of empathy. So you might say, don't you just wish that things weren't the way they are right now? Don't you just wish that you could do whatever you want because now that you're 15, you feel like you should be allowed to? And when you're saying don't you just wish, you're actually saying, but you can't. But there's so much empathy there. And I guess the last idea that I would share, among many others that we could talk about, is just some gentle emotion coaching. Again, being confident enough in yourself to look at your child and say, you are so upset about this. I get it. Or just look at them and say, that is really hard. That stinks. That's rotten.
Is there any research to suggest that having male role models in their lives that can actually sit down with them and, kind of walk them through the experiences that they had and share that empathy and understanding from common ground?
I'm so glad you asked the question. The last thing that I had on my list of things to talk about was the importance of good men in their lives. One thing that I'm coming across more and more as I talk to dads in particular, and a lot of mums, but mainly dads, is if you ask men how they're doing, so many of them will say, I'm either fine or I'm over it. I'm fine or I'm angry. I'm happy or I'm mad. And
there's no middle ground.
There's no middle ground. No, men are stable and stoic and just fine, or they're blowing up. And our boys are learning that. We've got to help our kids to see men experiencing the full range of their emotional repertoire. And that means that there's a whole lot more than angry or fine.
But then this comes back to that conversation we had earlier about starting young, right?
Right.
Helping them to recognize and understand. Months ago, we talked about even me as a woman recognizing that for the first time, there was more than 3 emotions in my repertoire, that it wasn't just, happy, sad or angry, that there were a multitude of other emotions because nobody kind of talked me through those. So if we can start at a young age to help our kids recognize all of the nuance that is around emotion, does that help?
It does. We're really out of time, but I want to take 60 more seconds and I'm going to do a quick activity with you, okay? Teach your kids, your boys, your girls, teach your kids that emotions exist in 2 different ways. They exist on high and low pleasantness, and they exist on high and low energy. So you can have high energy and high pleasantness, or you can have low energy and low pleasantness, or you can have high of one and low of the other, or vice versa. So let me ask you, what's a high energy, high pleasant emotion?
Excited.
Great. What's a high energy, low pleasant emotion?
Anxiety.
Great. What's a low energy, high pleasant emotion?
Joy.
Great. I would say contentment or calm. And what's a low pleasant, low energy emotion?
Apathy.
I'll take it. That's great. Simply doing an activity like that with the kids and draw it on 2 axes, like a line, like a cross, right? And have pleasantness on one and energy on the other. And talking with your kids about that and helping them to develop an emotional vocabulary. See, if you only have 2 words for emotions or 3 words for emotions, then they're all the emotions that you're actually going to be identifying that you're feeling. But the bigger your emotional vocabulary, the more you can identify the emotions that you're feeling and the more your emotional range expands. Your words create your world. And if you don't have the emotional vocabulary for all of these other emotions we can feel, then you won't know that you're feeling them. You'll think you're fine or you'll think you're angry.
Brene Brown brought out a book recently called
Atlas of the Heart.
Atlas of the Heart.
Yeah.
As a book to just read from cover to cover.
Boring.
It was quite boring.
Yeah.
But I love how she's able to take that nuance of emotion and go, well, hang on a sec, it's not just sad. You could be feeling, 7 or 8 different emotions, and these are how they differ from sadness. Sadness is this, but loneliness is this, or disappointment, it looks like this. And just, having those conversations with the kids is powerful.
I'm going to drop one last teaser in here. In a couple of months' time, early September, we're launching what might be our last summit ever. It's called the Smells Like Teen Spirit Summit. And we're going to be talking all about teenagers and their emotional lives. We have got some of the very best world experts coming along for this summit. And I think that both of the mums who have sent these emails through will find this summit so helpful, as will countless other parents. I wish we could talk more about this. I feel like we need another half an hour or so on this topic, but that's all we've got time for today. The Happy Families podcast is produced by Justin Rowan from Bridge Media. Craig Bruce is our executive producer. For more information about making your family happier and the upcoming summit, make sure you're following us along at Dr. Justin Coulson's Happy Families on Facebook or happyfamilies.com.au.